I'm okay. I'm told Louise this, but I'll tell everyone else I'm getting over a cold, so I'm going to try to have my voice last for the 90 minutes. I apologize if it's a little scratchy.
All right. I'm going to change the presenter controls to you.
Great. There we go.
And I can see your slides.
Excellent. Let's put those up. I see some of you have already looked at them. Thank you for attending today. Let's hope this presents. There we go. And I'm going to get you involved right away. We are talking about what's to come in 2018, a little bit of what some of that means. We're looking back a little at 2017. I'm sure some of you don't really want to look back, but we're going to. I know Louise mentioned she sent you the link. All of my slides are also on today's post for RA for All. So you can go get those and save that link, and it'll stay on my recent presentations page for 6 months. And then I'm pretty sure they're going to be included when Louise posts the recording of this also, and she'll send you an email about that.
Yes, I will.
So, yes?
Yes.
Okay, you will. Good. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to both learn how to assess and then stay on top of adult leisure reading and collection development trends. And we are going to get started right away by getting you involved. So Louise has a poll she's going to put up, I believe.
Yes, I'm going to launch it now.
Okay, I'll see if I can see it. The screen has the questions. There we go. So I want to know how you feel about trends and if everybody can answer this. And let me talk about those choices as you're deciding. And please pick one. It'll help me understand where everybody is. So the first one is, are you confident and excited? Do trends make you just like, this is your wheelhouse? Or are you more like, you try really hard, but it feels like a chore? And another way people respond to trends is that they're overwhelmed, and you're going to ignore trends until they're established, and then you can't ignore them anymore. Possibly number 4, you're just so out of touch, you don't even know how to begin. Or number 5, which is one that I have experienced also. I've actually experienced all 5 of these. But just stop talking to me right now. My boss made me come to this webinar. I am just trying to get through it. So if everyone can pick one of those, it will let me know where everyone is in the is feeling. And I'm going to let you know, like I said, I have felt all 5 of these things before. So please don't feel like there's a right answer. And I think I cannot see the results, Louise. So if you can tell me.
Yep, we have about 75% voted, so thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Oh, there they are.
Can you see them? Okay.
I can't get everyone else. They're on my screen.
Yep, everyone should be able to see them.
Great. Oh, I'm really, really glad that a lot of you think it keeps the job interesting. That's great. But for those of you, which are not insignificant numbers on the others, and I'm glad nobody here was forced to attend. That's good. For the people that are a little overwhelmed or they're trying, those people, I have tips for you here. So thank you for doing that. We're going to get back to the presentation.
There you go.
And we're going to just see if it'll go. There we go. Okay. So here's the deal. Whether you like them or not, trends are part of your job. So you do have to pay attention to them. If you're working with patrons once, which is what you do with a lot of leisure reading kind of questions, and that's what you're serving them, you have to not only anticipate what they want, but you're hopefully going to stay just one step ahead of them. Again, if we want them to visit us for their wants, for the things they want to do, not the things they need, then we have to make sure that we have what they want. I know this sounds obvious, but we don't always do it. That poll in the earlier slide hit at many of the reasons why we don't stay on top of trends. And today I'm going to catch you up to speed and share the tips on how to stay trending. We are also going to talk about how you can incorporate your trendy knowledge into your work every day so that you aren't just doing your regular job and then adding the trends on after you finish your normal work. What I'm trying to do here is give you a foundation and a way for you to sort of keep this going and stay trendy all year long. It'll become part of what you do with all your other jobs. I'm also going to make it easy and fun, so don't worry about it. Along the way, I'm also going to show you how to get your patrons involved in keeping you trendy, because that's really the biggest trend of all in how we serve patrons for any sort of leisure collection development idea. So books, reading, movies, music, whatever we're checking out that is for their wants, not their needs. And that's the participatory library experience. So I'm going to talk about that. But first, I want to talk to you about what we're going to, how I exactly broke it down. I'm going to identify trends in leisure readings for you. And of course, this is not everything, but these are the ones I've seen over time. So we start with established trends. Then we're going to move on to currently trending and then emerging. After each section, there will be a break where you can ask questions, so don't worry about that. And then I'm going to move on to, if there's time, to identifying trends in Reader's Advisory Service and collection development. And I say if there's time because I want to make sure I answer all the questions about the top trends. But also, all of those trends I've written about extensively on my blog, so you have links to a lot that I have to say about it in case we don't get to it. But first, I would like to talk to you about how do you become a trend spotter? Because I think that's the biggest hurdle that I see with people. Okay, look, what do I know? I am a 42-year-old white library lady from the suburbs. I am not close to the definition of hip. Trust me, I have 2 teenage kids. They let me know all the time. But it doesn't matter if you know where to look. You can stay on the trends easily. This leads us right away to step 1. Just pay attention, even to the things you don't like. And I do this all the time as part of my job. I am observant. I am paying attention to what is in the news, what is in the media, what people are asking about, and just keeping a notation of it. And also, don't waste your time trying to identify trends on your own. If you're observant, the trends are going to come to you. Your resources will identify them. Let the resources do the work, which is otherwise known as just being a librarian. You know that you can use resources to answer questions, right? This is your first line, right? We don't know the answers to everything, but we know where to find the answers to everything. This is what we're trained to do. This is a huge fundamental shift, though, in how you're going to think about trends, how you're going to think about the way you identify what's coming down the pipeline. Treat staying up to date on trends as any part of your typical library worker job. You are a gatekeeper of knowledge. The trends are not about how hip you are. They're just about the knowledge you get about what is currently being popular. And one of the ways you can easily identify trends and have fun is to read Entertainment Weekly every week. I literally think this is a job requirement. If you work with any leisure readers, any leisure watchers, anybody really, you need to be doing this. It covers everything popular in leisure reading and watching. And it does it in a way that's very cross-format, which we will talk about as one of the trends. By the way, they are paid to spot trends and report on them. So let them tell you what's popular. They are getting, they have to stay on top of it, or they won't get subscriptions, or they won't get advertisements. So literally read the magazine cover to cover every week. It takes less than 30 minutes. You don't have to read every word. Especially read things you don't like, don't understand, you don't regularly watch. They are going to tell you what you need to know. So like this week, there was a big picture of, at least on mine at home, of Daryl from The Walking Dead. If you're like me, you stopped watching The Walking Dead, you at least now know what went on last year, what's going on this season, and that it's popular enough for Entertainment Weekly to put it on the cover. There's no interpretation needed on your part. If it's in there, it's important to know about. Pay attention to the top 10 at the beginning of the magazine and the bullseye at the end, especially for those of you who said you still don't know the difference between a meme and a GIF. They will tell you what's popular, especially the bullseye. You can look up the things in the bullseye and see what's going on. So again, act like a librarian and read something. Read this. I'm also telling you it's an essential part of your job. So I am saying you should be able to do this at the desk. Your library, I'm sure, has either a paper or a digital copy or both subscriptions. I get one at my house and write it off as a business expense. But read it, read it, read it, read it. The next thing you should do is, if you're dealing mostly with books, is to check the USA Today bestseller list. Why do I like this list the best? Yes, it's not the New York Times, okay? It's not even the Library Journal one. But the Entertainment Weekly bestseller list is so important because they do every book that sells the most, regardless of whether it's children's, adults, teen, whether it's self-published or big 5 published, they don't care. It's a literal list of the best-selling books. If you want to see what quote-unquote America is reading, this is the bestseller list for you, and you can get it online. Now, those are for larger trends. What I would say to you is for hyper trend, local trends, the trends at your library, the best thing you need to do to become a trend spotter for your community is to look at the return cards on a regular basis. This is the only place at your library where you can see everything people check out in one place at one time. It is a snapshot of what is currently trending at your library, literally. You can also use it to see when trends are dying. For example, if a book that used to be hot is showing up on the return card, that means it's no longer on a long holds list. So like when 50 Shades of Grey started showing up on the return cart, I knew that the trend was waning a little. But I also would grab it just as it was starting to wane, put it on my desk, and it would be checked out within 20 minutes. I'd like to scan the return cards daily. Even better is if you can get a shift working on your circulation desk to see things as they come in, and you can talk about them with people and how they liked it and why they checked it out, etc. And then step 6 is that you need to repeat. You need to keep repeating because this will only work if you do things regularly. You will see these trends emerge over time. Now, some things pop up out of nowhere and everyone is scrambling to catch up, and we will address some of those later in this webinar. But you will feel better about trends and less overwhelmed if you make trend spotting part of your job. I'm going to get you up to speed today, but then you are going to get yourself to stay in shape. Okay, so we're going to move to established trends. I'm just going to pause for 1 second in case there are any questions. I doubt it right now, but I'm just going to pause.
No questions yet.
Great. Let's move on then. Oops, hold on. My microphone just dislodged a little. I thought a cough was coming. Okay, then let's move on. Our next thing we're going to talk about, and I brought up 50 Shades of Grey on purpose because an established trend is that erotica is here to stay. We are still definitely dealing with it. I love this picture, but before I get to talking about erotica specifically, I do want to talk to you about how I'm going to do this. I'm going to start by talking about the established trends, one that all of you should know about and have probably already incorporated into your work. This is just a reminder that these things have been trending for a while. Some will become standard and some may fade with all trends, but the question is, do you simply know these, or have you responded so your patrons know you know? Okay, because knowing a trend is one thing, and I want you to do this with all the trends, but making sure you demonstrate that you have that knowledge to your patrons is key to any response to trends. Otherwise, they don't know we know the trends. So like it or not, as an institution, libraries are not known for being the trendiest place around. We have to change that, both because this statement is wrong. As a group, librarians are more in the know than other professions because we work with popular culture requests all the time. And but because of it, some of it is our fault. We may know the trends, but we don't do a very good job demonstrating that knowledge. Patrons don't ask because they don't think we're trendy, and it's because we don't show them. So I'm really going to focus on how to show that you know the trend and demonstrate it to patrons without them having to ask, because I'm going to educate you both, and that's why we have the trend and then how you're going to respond. And I'm going to do that. I've also put one trend per slide so as not to muddy up all the slides with too much information, but also give you enough substance on each slide so you have something to refer back to. Because I expect you to go back and use these slides as part of your work so you can sort of check them off as you go if you've handled those trends to feel a sense of accomplishment. You're also going to notice that I have a lot more to say about the established trends as we start, and that's because they are more established. These you probably know about. As we go to the current and the emerging, there's going to be less information and about how to respond that's unique and more just trying to give you the information. Okay. Also, don't feel bad if you don't know these established trends that I'm mentioning. They are established, yes, but they might not be huge at your library. These are just things you need to think about. Okay, so now I'm going to get started with erotica. I used this double picture of the same Susan Elizabeth Phillips book in another webinar I do. It's one of my favorite graphics that I've created. Why? I call it the 50 Shades of Grey effect. That is the exact same book. It's a book all of you guys have because Susan Elizabeth Phillips is from Chicago area, from Illinois. The It Had to Be You cover with the boat on Lake Michigan, that's the one most libraries had for years. It does not portray what's inside the book. The one on the right with the cleavage does portray what's inside the book. What I find interesting is it's been the same book all the time, but until 50 Shades of Grey made it okay for us to have sort of more erotic stories, it's better being portrayed in the covers. But I want to talk about the fact that this erotica trend, as I'm calling it, has also extended into all fiction and even nonfiction. 50 Shades of Grey has made it acceptable to add more explicit sex to all leisure reading. It is as if that one series' popularity told all the publishers that people can handle more and want explicit sex in their books. Now, I'm not denying as a culture that we're getting less prude by the minute, but you need to be aware that this trend is hitting everything, and not all your readers may be on board. So the thing about the trend I want you to think about is that authors readers may have trusted before may be getting too sexy for them now, and not just in romance. Just make sure you don't only buy the sexy books, and make sure you're aware that it's not just a romance issue. Okay, here's the other more sensitive issue. Since you can't assume anymore that little old ladies don't want sex and young people do, which I just told you you can't, and I've seen it. I've seen young people coming in asking for more gentle reads and old ladies saying things like, "This hotter the better." You need to make sure you talk to the readers about what they want and figure out their preferences. However, I am not advocating that you talk about the level of sex in a book at the desk. Definitely not a good idea. So here are two suggestions of ways you can do it with a link to more information. The heat index is something a lot of libraries have started doing. The heat index I have linked for is from Kokomo Howard County Library in Indiana. I worked with them, and she, Meredith, who works there, did make a heat index, and you can click through, and she basically uses a thermometer in that graphic, and I was going to put it on the slide, but it didn't come out. Well, it's too big, and shows different authors, but she shows what the levels mean. So if she calls it hot, this is what it means. This is what you can expect in fairly blunt language, so that it's easy for patrons to help themselves. And then they update it with authors regularly online. Also, there's a website called All Readers, which if anyone has gone to any of my presentations, I talk about a lot. It is not the prettiest site, but man, will it give you sex and violence straight up. So look up It Had to Be You and see for yourself. Okay, our next trend, there we go, is that audio is king. So let's talk about that. From podcasts to streaming to downloads to still CDs, everyone is listening to their stories. I have this great quote. I waited to make my slides so they'd be the most up to date. And this is from Stephen Graham Jones, who's a fantastic literary horror writer, if you want to read him, Native American influences. And he talked about, how the numbers for ebooks are up, for audiobooks are up. And I thought that was an interesting thing. People are definitely less crabby about audiobooks being up than when ebooks were. But let's talk about that. Ebooks grew so fast because they were brand new. So we all got on the bandwagon, and like the tweet says above, everybody was talking about the death of the print book. Audio, meanwhile, has been around forever. It hit a threshold, and then now it is growing again quickly. I first reported on this trend back in 2016, and you can see that with that Listen Up it was an art program, the Adult Reading Roundtable that we did, and you can actually click on that when you go to the slides and read a lot more about it and look at a bunch of presentations about it, including the head of the Audio Publishers of America, where she first alerted us to this spike that they saw starting in 2016. But the first, I think you can also use a link where it says ebooks down, audio up. You can use that to also pull that up. But first things first, you need to be including audio in your general work with leisure readers to respond to this trend. Even if it is not part of your department, even if you don't have audio where you work, you must be including it. You need to include it in displays. You need to remind patrons that they can get the audio if the print is checked out. You just need to remember that audio is an option. This will come in later when I talk about another trend that is coming up down the pike. But the other thing is that podcasts are really fueling this. People are listening to podcasts more and more. There are now more original story podcasts, and people are getting used to streaming things on their phone, to downloading things on their phone and listening to them in a way that they haven't before. So what happens is that now people are going to Hoopla and Overdrive more to get audiobooks because they're so used to it, especially with things like the really easy to use Audible app and the plans they have. And then for libraries, also the new Libby app makes it so easy to download audiobooks. And the Hoopla app has always been very easy. But here's the thing. This is an obstacle in our way. We need to be providing podcast readers advisory. And I don't just mean you like this podcast, listen to that podcast. I mean, you like this podcast, you might like these books. So we need to get ourselves up to speed here. First of all, I have a link there where it says, despite controversy, a whole post about how to do it with some resources from Library Journal to get you started, that they did a whole thing about a whole bunch of different podcasts. But one of the things you can do is do a poll of all your staff and see what podcasts they listen to, and then ask them to possibly suggest books or that go with them, or tell you about the podcasts if you're the one that's better at suggesting books and you can make lists. It would be a great way to do like something on Facebook or on Goodreads or on Twitter or Instagram, like Danny works in AV and here's his favorite podcast. Here are books if you like this podcast too. But there is a level of controversy here, and I've heard it from some directors, and I want to mention it, and I go into a little more detail in that link. But I've had people tell me that their bosses will not allow them to do anything having to do with podcasts because podcasts are free and are not something a library circulates. And again, I say the focus is not on suggesting other podcasts. The focus is on suggesting other things you have for checkout in the library for fans of that podcast. So I'm not going on a limb here to say that the Lure podcast, Lure, is a storytelling, dark fantasy, creepy podcast, is extremely popular. There are suggestions in that link for Lure. Of course, you should be suggesting books for that. You should be suggesting TV shows. You should be suggesting downloads. You should be suggesting movies to go with it. That is where you need to do your job. So we help people find answers to reference questions all the time and give them answers to things we don't circulate. If they need information about, for example, a government service, we don't say, well, we don't circulate that. We won't answer the question. We still help them. People are obsessed with podcasts, myself included. Make sure they know that you're thinking of them. We're going to talk about participatory displays later, and a great one, though, is, in case I forget to mention it then, podcast read-alikes, and just have books and put like the podcast, a sticker on it that says what podcast it's a read-alike for, and just fill the display with books and audiobooks and movies and everything. And then say, tell us your favorite podcast so we can create a read-alike list for you and have people leave slips of paper. That's how you show them you're responding to a trend. Okay, so you should also just ask them what they listen to if you're helping a reader, if they're having trouble telling you what they like, and say to them, tell me what you like to listen to as a podcast, and maybe we can find books that are similar, and then you can use resources like Novelist, Audible, or Audiophile Magazine to find that. And I have a list of resources there for you to help take that podcast reader's advisory to the next level. So while audiobooks being up is an established trend at this point, how we help people is sort of emerging. Okay, next. Our next thing I'm going to talk about is that genre blending has become the norm. For years, I used to say, well, genre blending is a trend. Well, it's not anymore. It's a trend. We all know about it. It's so established at this point the readers aren't surprised anymore. I used to say, the biggest thing about genre blending is readers might be surprised that a book that was like literary fiction has speculative elements. Well, on your screen are two of the top books from 2017, and I've read both of them, and they are literary fiction, and they are going to win plenty of awards, and they already have won a lot of awards. And guess what? Extremely speculative. Sing Unbury Sing has a ghost as a narrator. Not only that, but there's a couple other ghost characters in the book. And Exit West is basically a refugee novel that involves people going through portals to get somewhere else. I have reviews of both of them on my blog if you'd like to read them. But the point is that speculative elements especially are the norm. Speculative elements really show up everywhere, but it's also the books that are really good, like we're seeing, like that are getting a lot of notice. In his nonfiction book, Mapping the Interior, Michael Chabon talks about this a lot, and you probably have this book at your library, but that he talks about, and this was like 2014 or even earlier, that the best fiction out there is written on those borderlands between genres. Now, this doesn't even take into account the fact that mystery also is now being taken over by suspense, which is another genre blending trend. Most importantly, that whole idea of the villain's point of view being included in what used to be a traditional mystery is happening all the time. I have been worried that readers would be sort of upset about this. I have to tell you, I'm seeing a few readers get upset about it, but for the most part, because a lot of mystery readers cross over into suspense, because it has a strong investigative element, I'm not seeing as much backlash as I thought. That could also be because the trend has been fairly established. But here's a really good example of a series that sort of did this halfway, and it's a series that is very popular. The Galbraith Mysteries, written by J.K. Rowling with Cormoran Strike as a PI. Cuckoo's Calling is the first one. It's a straight-up PI hard-boiled story. But the third book, Career of Evil, made a huge shift and really took that point of view of the villain. It reads like a PI novel, and then it switches and it reads like a suspense novel. And it has the aspects of both. I was waiting when that book came out to see if there was a backlash, and I really didn't hear any. People really liked that book. So I think that that was sort of a test that it's going to keep going. But overall, really, literary fiction adding genre elements in general is a big trend that we need to know about. So we know that this is happening, and even our patrons are noticing it, but what can we do to help? Just make sure you have a list of sure bet genre blends that are coming out or that came out, books you can give to people. One of my other favorites is The Sisters Brothers by Patrick DeWitt, for example. It's a Western, it's a mystery, it's a historical fiction, it's hilarious, it's literary, as well as like these two on the screen. But there's tons of books. You also have to make sure that you're finding out how people feel about genre blending, especially speculative elements. Speculative elements are the ones I find throw people off the most because they're reading what they thought was a book set in reality, and then there's some sort of a little more than magical realism, like a refugee novel like Exit West, which is predicated on the fact that people just walk through doors and go somewhere else. I think because it's on so many best lists, you could say, well, listen, there's a huge speculative element. People walk through doors and end up somewhere else. But at its heart, it's a literary novel about the refugee experience. I think if you tell people that, that's fine. These elements might be mentioned on Novelist, too, if you're not familiar. It'll definitely be mentioned in the reviews. So make sure you look at that. And I often, if I don't know for sure, just look a book up on Novelist and then read them, read with the patron the reviews. Often patrons will be fine with the speculative elements, even the ones that say they want real books, as long as they know it's coming. That's what I found. If you warn them, they're doing fine. But also have fun with it. Genre blends are great for interactive displays we're going to discuss later. You could put out all these genre blended books and then put up a sign that says, guess the genre. It's also a great way to get out a wide variety of books on a display because you can have so many different books. You can even include mysteries with a strong literary element. And just have fun way to get a lot of different books in front of people who tend to stay in their little genre sections. Besides, why shouldn't you have fun with it? The author should have. This is one of my favorite books I read last year. I listed it on my blog as the most fun I had reading a book. And we just had our Adult Reading Roundtable Steering Committee meeting. And Melissa from Deerfield, who's our past chair, said, okay, Becky talked about this book, and I was skeptical, but I read it. And oh my God, I love this book. River of Teeth, you can read a longer review by me. But it is an alternate history Western. So it's alternative history. So it's science fiction. It's also a Western. And instead of, as you can kind of see, instead of the cowboys riding cows or riding horses and herding cattle, they're riding hippos. It sounds crazy. This book is amazing. It also has a non-binary narrator who uses the pronoun they. It's got a huge cast of characters, men and women. And it is a novella. And literally, you think it sounds crazy, read it, trust me. But talk about taking the whole idea of genre blending to the next level and having fun with it. Speaking of diverse books, let's talk about the next thing, which is we need diverse books. And I want to talk about this. There are no more excuses, and that's the big thing I want to talk to you about. A lot of people have talked at length about making sure our collections are more diverse and that they actually represent the world at large and not just our profession. And this is a huge problem. And as I've said here in that link where it says no more excuses, as I help to organize panels on this topic, 80% of librarians are white women, and that is from the ALA statistics. Does your collection reflect your community, or does it look more like you? We need to have straight talk and real world experiences and practical strategies for doing this. This is not an emerging trend or even just a current trend. It is an established one. It is our duty. There's so much out there in the professional literature on this topic. But my point I want to bring to you is that I'm done with any excuses you're going to bring me. At that link, I have an article by one of the best professionals on the topic. Actually, at that top link, Robin Bradford from Washington State. And that's her essay from Lit Hub's 21st Century Librarian column, where she talks about the power of our choices. If you need more to read on this topic, start with her. There's just so much to say on this topic. I've organized like 3 or 4 panels on it, especially for the Adult Reading Roundtable, which you can take a look at. But if you, and we could do a whole talk on this, I just need to say to you, if you want more, go to my blog and use the diversity tag to find more. But how are we going to respond? Because I told you you're done with excuses. First, under diversity audits, that's a link from School Library Journal's Teen Librarian Toolbox to see how and why you should conduct a diversity audit. Diversity audits are twofold. First, you need to check your collection against your population to make sure that you have accurate representation. And we're going to be having a new census before you know it, but so use the data you have. But you also have to check yourself as a type of diversity audit, your personal reading, your displays, and your book lists, because the publishers are also almost all white, and they tend to publish more white perspective books. So make sure you're buying books from a variety of perspectives and displaying them. And please, can I tell you, put up some African American books now. Don't wait till February. Put up books on Native American with Native American characters. I already gave you writers. I gave you one before, Stephen Graham Jones, who's amazing and wins lots of awards. Put them up any time of year. Put them in your displays. In one of the talks I organized for Adult Reading Roundtable, where Robin Bradford was talking, we also invited Mickey Kendall, who's from Chicago. And one of them, I can't remember which one, I think it's Mickey Kendall, said, you know what? Black people don't want to only read about slavery. So I think this is an important thing. There are lots of books featuring characters of color all over the spectrum. But many people argue that they can't and don't add more diverse books because they haven't read them. Again, my trend for you is you're not allowed to have any more excuses. There are now so many reading challenges to help you branch out. The graphic is from Jean Luen Yang's Reading Without Walls challenge, which is super easy to do, and a lot of libraries have done it. But you can look closer to home, and Skokie Public Library has worked very hard to check themselves and to have their patrons check themselves by doing reading challenges for both staff and patrons. Again, this topic could go on for the rest of the time. I just want to direct you to the link where it says reading challenges, where you can go and see my post about the Skokie program. And to get to the slides I mentioned in that post, you click on the link I provided and enter one of the presenters' names. It's pretty easy. Just ILA, it's from ILA, and they don't allow you to link directly, but it's not hard to come to. And all my contact information is on the blog if you have trouble. Or you can contact Skokie. They'd be more than happy to send it to you. The point is, they said, and it's in there in the notes, but our collections, our suggestions that we're giving people are too white and they're too male. Let's shake it up and let's make sure we're reading other things. And let's make sure we're checking ourselves. Let's make sure we're finding other titles and that we're reading them so we can suggest them. And they've had mixed results. They're doing better, but they're not doing great. And they're very honest about it. So I would highly suggest checking there. Okay, those are our established trends. Do we have any questions about those before we go on to currently trending?
Hi, Becky. No questions yet, but just a comment that somebody else also loved River of Teeth. And
yay!
I just put it on hold at my home library, so I'll let you know what I think.
And it's like super quick, and I literally, it's the most fun I had reading a book this year. I'm really glad. Give it a try. And again, it's a great book to suggest because it hits on, if you keep thinking about it as I'm talking, it hits on like most of the trends I'm discussing. Yeah. It's diverse, it's genre blended, it's fun, it's, yeah, great. It's easy to book talk, so great. All you got to do if you haven't read it is Hippos in the West, and you know, people will take it. All right, let's move on to currently trending. All right, we're going to talk about how genre readers are fighting back. This trend has actually been going on for a while. But it's not quite established yet, and let me talk about why. The current coming of age adults, the ones who are running things right now, grew up children of the hippies, like myself. Like we were born in the late 60s and the 70s. And like we're our families that raised us, my family included, it was more relaxed the generation before. So kids like me were encouraged to read things like V.C. Andrews. My dad was like, whatever, I don't care. And I was really very young. And watch Star Trek and Star Wars together. It wasn't poo-pooed. It was what we did. So as a result, we now have a generation of smart, well-educated people who love genre and won't allow it to be disparaged. We stand up for our genres. Remember when 2 slides ago when I talked about how the best genres these days are adding genre, best authors these days are adding genre to their literary works? Yes, that's because they're all came of age this way too. And they're like, I can write, Sing Unburied Sing, which is amazing. And who cares if there's ghosts in it? That's how I'm telling my story. And it works beautifully. And nobody is going to argue with it. Well, some people will, but it's not. But the point is that geek culture, and especially romance authors, will not be bullied anymore. This all came to a head in the New York Times in September, which I'm sure many of you saw. And you can read the link, use that link to read about it. And it's just one example. But basically, the New York Times disparaged romance terribly. And lots of us, myself included, and I'm not even a huge romance reader, but I am a defender of horror. And so I know this happens, that horror gets disparaged. As does science fiction and fantasy still, too, even though some of the best books are in those genres. But the best place to go to see where romance particularly is defended is their Smart Bitches Trashy Books, run by very smart people, talking about the importance of reading romance and why it matters, and who cares that it always has a happily ever after. That's supposed to happen. It's part of the genre. But it's also, as we're going to see later, everybody goes to comic book conventions now. You can especially see that this is a current trend in that famous people regularly, superstars, go to Comic-Con every year. They get their kids dressed up. Sometimes they dress up, and they post it on social media. Yet, we as a profession as a whole, librarians, still disparage genre readers. And I see it all the time. It happens frequently. I get people privately messaging me to say, that's great, that you are defending romance, but I don't like them. They're not well written. And that's bull. That's not true. One of the great things we're seeing is places like Kirkus, who give out awards every year, who are very well known for being very strict about the books that they give stars to, let alone give Kirkus awards to, had multiple romance books on their best books of the year. One by Sarah Teitel, who has a series with librarians. One with Sarah McLean, with big, people writing straight up romance. They also they had straight up genre everywhere. You need to stop disparaging. Make sure that you are respecting these titles. But the biggest problem here is the fear of the unknown. That's what I see all the time. It's fear that drives most of the problem. In the presentation, link from the last slide, I also share a chart done by Rusa, LJ, and Novelist. And I have it a lot of different places. It's in a lot of places that you can see. But just trust me, I've used it a lot. That genre workers fear the most the genres of science fiction, horror, and romance. Christian fiction's in there too. But let's move from that for now. They're very, very high in how people feel uncomfortable. And Westerns, too. And we're going to talk about Westerns being hot. I've already kind of showed you that with River of Teeth. Library workers are scared of helping these readers because they said that. What genre workers do you fear the most? What genres do you fear the most? It's those. And so they don't know them. And so they don't help people. But the problem is the readers of these genres aren't going to take it lying down anymore. They're going to come to the library. They're going to use your resources. They're going to check out books and want more. And so you have to know about this. How do you do this? Well, there's 2 really good ways you can do this. And actually the link to the feared are going to be in this last link presentation that I have a link to. But let me tell you the 2 easiest ways for you to respond. First of all, enlist the help of your regular patrons. I call them your super users. The people who come to the library and always check out those genre books, especially the genres you know the least about. When I first came to my job at the Berwyn Library back in the summer of 2000, one of the things I noticed right away was that our science fiction and fantasy collection was a mess, especially our science fiction. We had lots of the classics and not a lot of the newest stuff. I had an entire collection to go to sort of overview, and I knew that I wasn't completely up to date with science fiction. I read in a specific niche, but I wasn't completely up to date. I immediately found, because I was introducing myself to all the new patrons, talking to them, I found one of my super users who read science fiction, and I spent time with him. I talked to him about what he's reading. I actually would photocopy the book list and library journal science fiction review sections and give them to him to take home and to read and to make comments on what he thought would be good to read. I didn't necessarily blindly order whatever he wanted, but I enlisted his help to get that collection up to speed. We had regular check-ins where we talked about what we had. And within a year, I had that collection really, really well established. And within 2 years, it had been fully weeded. And I remember that because my daughter was born in the summer of 2002, 2 years after I started. And I finished reading that collection 8.5 months pregnant. So I will never forget that. But I left on that maternity leave super proud about the way we had that collection. And I couldn't have done it without enlisting the help of patrons. I love helping romance readers. Romance is my least favorite genre to read personally. However, I talk to them all the time. They're my favorite to help because they don't take it lying down. They will advocate for their genre and tell you why they love it. And so they help me to know what questions to ask and how to help people. But that being said, you still have to educate yourself and learn more about what you personally don't enjoy by staying in genre shape. And that link goes to the presentation I've referred to that I did for Booklist and Novelist together. It was a live event, and it was with some other people. And we did that this fall. And you can see that slide I mentioned with the genres, but also hear me and a few others talk about how we stay in genre shape, especially not for the genres we don't necessarily enjoy. And I talk about River of Teeth there too. I am not kidding you. I love that book. So just know that we have to take genre into consideration. We cannot be like, oh, it's not worth our time. Let's worry about literary books. Okay, this is a trend that I've been watching and has surprised me a little. I bet you heard that the Hallmark Channel had its highest ratings yet this Christmas season. And I bet it wasn't hard to miss the fact that Get Out and The Shape of Water are being nominated for every best movie. Well, those are gentle reads and horror. I mean, I know I'm talking about movies, and that's a picture of the book version of The Shape of Water that is coming out. The novel and the movie were done at the same time, so it's not quite a novelization. It's written by Guillermo del Toro and Daniel Krauss, who works for Booklist, who's an award-winning YA horror novelist. And that book is coming out in February. You should be ordering it right now. The point is, and It was the highest grossing horror movie of all time. All of this happened in 2017. I'm going to go on a limb and say it's because people are scared and uneasy and unhappy with the current situation that's happening in our country. And I want to be clear. I think people on all sides of what's going on in America now are unhappy and uneasy. And I'm not justifying either side, but they're all uneasy. And I'm seeing this trend with escapist reading. And I have to tell you, it's been well documented that not all people escape the same way. It was first documented in the early 80s in a book by Stephen King, which you can go get right now on your shelves, called Danse Macabre. And dance is spelled D-A-N-S-E. And it is a part history of horror and part social scientific study of the psyche of people. And in it, he has argued, and I've quoted this many times, including in my book, The Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror, that in times of political upheaval, people turn to horror in droves. And lots of horror authors and people who write about horror, myself included, are noticing, most notably New York Times bestselling author Brian Keene, that we are entering a second renaissance or a third renaissance for horror. We had the Stephen King, the 80s, then we had the early 2000s, and now we're having one again. People are turning to it in droves. They're turning to gentle reads too. So when people come into you and want to escape the current life situation, and people say that to me all the time, I don't want to read about stuff in the news. Don't assume that they only want gentle reads. I argue all the time in my work with horror readers that one of the things people love about horror, and myself included, is it's an escape from real world. One, I have a pretty okay life, so I like to read about scary things. But also, if things are going poorly, it is not as bad as an actual zombie chasing you down the street trying to eat you. So don't forget that. But, my husband, a regular heterosexual guy from the Chicago suburbs, is obsessed with the Hallmark Channel, and he gave me permission to say this. People are shocked when they find out. The Hallmark movies at Christmas, he just watches them constantly. This is also a guy who loves to watch really bad horror movies. And for him, it is just an escape, and he loves it. So make sure we're displaying escapist reading. Maybe we want to do smaller displays and hit on all the different ways to escape. Maybe you want to escape by going to outer space. But my advice is to say, having a bad day, having a bad month, escape, and put up tons of different books. Fantasy, science fiction, romance, horror. Don't just do single genre displays. Show your patrons that you understand that they're looking for an escape. And again, include audio, include movies on these.
Hey, Becky,
okay,
it's
the
Louise.
next thing, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Somebody wanted to know the title of the book you were talking about. Did it have dance in the title?
D-A-N-S-E, Macabre, M-A-C-B-R-E.
Okay.
By Stephen King. And you'll have it at your libraries. It was the nonfiction book he wrote years before on fiction. I also would recommend beefing up your copies of everything by Stephen King, by the way. Check your collections. This trend just emerged a few days ago. And he's going to be getting the PEN Award for his contribution to American letters. So there's going to be increased interest from people who don't normally read Stephen King.
Okay.
So thank you for mentioning that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. No problem. Now I want to talk about genre trends. There are always a lot of trends in genres. I purposely mentioned one earlier with mysteries, that they're getting the suspense aspects in there. But genre-specific trends are happening all the time. Again, this is actually 2 programs to talk about these trends. And I do have links to those. They were ones that I did just a few weeks ago, Demystifying Genre and Staying in Genre Shape, for PCI webinars. And through Rails, you can actually view those archives for free. You can ask Louise about it, but I do have a link to it on my blog. And because you're a Rails member, you can get those. And Louise can maybe send out something to everybody on how to do that. But the slides are there too, if you want. And I do have the trends for current trends for each genre on those slides under Demystifying Genre. But today I just want to talk about a couple big ones. The Westerns are hot. I showed you that River of Teeth book, but I have a whole post at that link about why Westerns are so hot and all the stuff that's going on with Westerns and the different books that are using the trend, and you can read about that. Just don't think Westerns are just for the old men who come in. They are not. There's a huge revival, and you need to make sure you're aware of it. The other thing I'm really noticing is that all those girl books, so, Girl on a Train, Gone Girl, Woman in the Window, that's the new one. They were just being girl books, and we were talking about the girl books, but now I'm starting to see domestic suspense coming up as a genre. So whereas I used to put those books under psychological suspense, and they were like a trend in psychological suspense, I really think that domestic suspense, this idea that there are stories that are very much grounded in our real life. Psychological suspense used to be all about stalkers and serial killers, and now there's still those. But domestic suspense, these stories of real people in extraordinary circumstances with an unreliable narrator, might be becoming its own genre. So take a look for that. There are a lot of resources that refer to it. You can look it up on Novellas too. And another big one from a genre is that science fiction and fantasy are blurring. Books used to be science fiction or fantasy, and if an author wrote in both, clearly their book was science fiction or it was fantasy. That's not the case anymore. We can go back to this trend as early as the original Star Wars movies to see, that Star Wars really was a blend of science fiction and fantasy. But we're seeing it in books now. Here are 2 books on the screen. The beginning of the trilogy that N.K. Jemisin has won many, many awards for, the 5th season, and All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders. Both of those books are literally 50-50 science fiction fantasy. They are very hard to place, and they are winning all the awards, going back to the best books being genre blends. So you need to be aware of what's popular in each genre, especially the ones you have the most questions about, and these will change. Some of these trends, like erotica and romance, will move to established. And some, like those mashups we saw of like Pride and Prejudice and zombies, and there was a whole bunch of them, some like those will just disappear. Just be aware for genre-specific trends, like the ones I'm mentioning here. Go see the current ones. And maybe some of the trends I'm going to mention today will just disappear also, especially those I'm listing as emerging. And I know of one that might. But if certain genre trends are really popular with your patrons, even if you don't know that they're going to stick around, by all means, buy more, but also promote them. Okay, let's go to another current trend, which is the format that patrons have format media blindness. I've been noticing this trend is that readers switch not only between ebooks, audiobooks, and print books more easily because they are used to all formats and just want the story in the fastest way possible. But they also move between the same story in different media and formats. So from book to movie to TV. I first noticed this trend maybe a handful of years ago when we had The Walking Dead, which was a graphic novel. Then there was the TV show, which I have there on the screen. And then we had novels that were preludes. And then we went back to another TV show series that's also a preview. Fans like the stories they like, and they're actually often more willing to go to get them wherever and however and whenever they can. And I think that, like, another example of Marvel and DC have capitalized on this big time by rebooting comic books, by combining TV shows and movies in the storylines. Like, if you have to watch everything to get the full story. And one of the things I really think this is happening is that streaming and on-demand viewing, listening and reading, is so prevalent. I was going to make it its own trend, but I realized that these two were so linked that they couldn't be listed separately. People can stream all of their leisure options, from books to movies to audio TV. They're comfortable with the delivery method of that streaming, and they bounce around within one story universe and then between completely different ones. On a side note, genre fiction in all formats was the earliest adopters for this trend. And that's why I think it's no surprise that the stories are, that people are doing this with, are the ones, those genres are the ones that are using it. But how are we going to respond? Again, combine formats and displays and in your suggestions. Maybe make sure you're talking about things like, The Walking Dead in all its different formats. Make sure that you're dealing with cross-format storytelling in terms of your suggestions. So we don't want to just combine the formats and make sure that they're put together so that you can get this book out in ebook, audio, and print, but that some stories do go across formats and that you're making sure people are aware of that. And one of the great ways to do that is, and that link goes to Northbrook Public Library's Tumblr. Watch this, read that. They actually won an award for it from ILA, from the Adult Reading Roundtable, for doing that, where they take, you're watching this, you should read this. And they do a really good job doing that, cross-format suggestions, and even at times talk about stories that are told cross-format. Another current trend that I actually think is an emerging trend, because so many audiobooks are now going to Audible only, which is driving me insane because we can't get Audible only in library collections because they aren't available in Overdrive or Media on Demand. We need to get out there and complain to Amazon about the fact that Audible are not in libraries. I remember when we couldn't get Kindle on Overdrive. That's how old I am. And we went out en masse. I've already visited both reps and sent many, many emails. Do it. Get on a campaign to make an Audible link available in Overdrive. There are so many books that aren't available any other way in audio. And now some authors are going to exclusible Audible only. And that means they have to buy it. If they could make the switch with Kindle, they can make the switch for Audible. So that's my rant on that for today. Okay, those are our current trends. Do we have any questions on the current trends?
Yes, just one. One of the participants says, so I should stop waiting for dystopian novels to go away?
Okay, that's a great question, and I didn't put it even in because, yeah, you shouldn't. And we're actually going to get to that in a second because I'm going to talk about the emerging trend of resistance books. So, yes, I think that dystopian novels in general are just, they're done. They're a trend. They're going to be there. And if you look, they've actually been there forever. We've always had dystopian novels. Again, the next slide, I think we'll talk about it a tiny bit. I was going to bring it up. Right. But yes, they're not going anywhere.
All right. One more question just popped in. How about books for LGBTQ?
So when I talk about do we need diverse books, that I am including that in there. And I talk about that in length in some of the links. LGBTQ books are extremely popular. If you look at my slides on romance, on the demystifying genre, one of the biggest trends in romance in that slide is male-male romances are hugely popular, and they're being read by men and women. So that is a huge trend in romance right now. Actually, some of my favorite romance titles are male-male romances. LGBTQ books are being read by everyone, and I include that in the We Need Diverse Books movement.
Okay, great. Well, that's it for now. Thanks.
Okay, so let's go to emerging trends, and this is where dystopia is coming in. I'm going to start with the most obvious emerging trend, and then we're going to move forward to more that are less obvious. If you think Fire and Fury and the Me Too are the end of this emerging trend of resistance books, you are wrong. Now, and you also, if you think you have it under control, I need you to think again. But yes, I was going to mention dystopian books are a great example of resistance books. That's how it started. But now we're getting more obvious resistance books. This is just the start of the resistance stuff you're going to see. And as we build toward the fall, midterm elections and beyond, it's going to build. Get ready now. This one is tricky, though, because there will be high demand for these titles. And you're going to want to buy as many as you can. But then they'll be checked out, and you'll still want to be buying more, and they'll all be gone now. And then in 2 years, only a few will remain relevant. And it's frustrating, I know, but I think there's a few ways you can handle this. First, be careful on what and how much you order. You can't simply order every resistance book because you'll have no money left for everything else you need to buy. So consider carefully. Get the ones with the most sort of, press and stuff that people are talking about, and then get them in print. And also don't forget that there'll be local issues and local things that are more popular in your community that are resistance issues. Consider also getting more titles, the ones you can't necessarily afford to get maybe multiple copies for. Add multiple copies in Overdrive or your streaming services so that you can have them. And then maybe, they'll be easier to quote unquote weed because they won't be taking up shelf space. But use your consortia to your advantage. We have great resource sharing here in Illinois. Work with your partners to share the load. Maybe you buy one French title and then you get a neighboring library to buy the other. Make sure you also, this is a separate thing I need to talk about very briefly. Make sure you allow new books to be shared. I am still finding, and my local library is in the Swan Consortium, and which is one of the best. I feel so lucky to be part of that. However, I'm still finding libraries that won't loan out their new books, and it drives me insane. When I worked at the Berman Library, we were one of the first libraries to allow not only loans of new books, and I did this, but 3-week loans of new books. Because if people want to read the book, it's doing me no good sitting on my shelf where no one can read it. And because we have the card catalog, everyone can see that we own it. And because the system prioritizes the local users, so that if you're at a tiny library and you don't allow loans of new books, you're not letting anybody read it. And if one of your readers wants it, as soon as it's done in another library, if you've sent it out, it's coming right back to your reader. And the catalog is now so visual, they can quote unquote see your newest books. And you can make a carousel if you're in Swan of your newest edition books so they can still see them and put holds on them. So stop making excuses for not loaning your new books. Please loan your new books. And that will help with emerging trends like this one, so that it isn't only the big libraries that are burdening all the load of sharing these books. You can also institute Lucky Day collections, which a lot of libraries have. My local library, LaGrange, does this, where the books that our patrons seem to want the most, we buy and put on a shelf right as you walk in. And those books are available only to people who walk into the building, as long as they have an Illinois library card that's valid, any library card that's valid, because we accept them. You can check it out. You just can't place a hold on it, and it's only for 1 week. So that's another way to manage these trends. If you have a Lucky Day budget or a Hot Reads budget, you can buy these and put them on there and have multiple copies. But no matter how you manage this trend, you're gonna run out of books, and there's going to be a wait. And that's okay as long as you make it clear in all your actions, especially your passive readers advisory, that you understand this trend and want to help. Put up displays that hearken to resistances of the past. So you're out of Me Too books, display the suffragette movement or past Hollywood scandals. You're out of political books about the current Trump administration, put out displays on past political upheaval times. Preferably further back than Nixon might be a little too close. But we can shine when we have some really obscure, like the Whiskey Rebellion is a fun one that I've done before, some fun political scandals of the past, and put up displays to show people that you know that they're looking for these books. Now, this I want to say you should do for every display, but it's so, so important on emerging trends. Make sure you post pictures of displays and lists from in the building to all social media platforms so patrons know you are responding. These can be like while you wait displays, like while you wait for Fire and Fury, here are juicy scandals from the past that are just as shocking. It's always a good idea to post your displays everywhere, but with emerging trends, it's the most important to show that you know. Okay, I also want you to be calm in the face of these emotions, not just because these are emotional issues I'm talking about, but you will get heated responses from both sides, yes. But because apparently nobody knows how to have a conversation without screaming at each other these days, there will also be raw emotions from your non-regular library users about having to wait for a book. I'm seeing this especially with Fire and Fury. I find that I get most of my, but I paid for these books with my tax dollars comments. I need them now. I'm paying for this. I get those comments most for these hot trends with not regular users. But if you did the other steps, you've kept things in check. And finally, learn from this current example. These overwhelming trends that encompass a lot of different people and a wide range of readers happen all the time. They often drive people to the library too because they just can't. What am I going to get? There's so many books. You need to be ready. You can apply this advice to all of these deluge trends, but of course you have to tailor it to the trend. So your display would harken back to resistance's past, maybe not, but a topic in the past, because nothing new is the way to best respond to this. And have fun and let people know you're doing it, and your patrons are going to be really appreciative. Okay, that's the most raw emerging trend. Here are some other ones. Don't simply dismiss small presses and independent presses anymore. They're really doing great work and winning major awards. Look at the book on the top right, Her Body and Other Parties. That book was nominated for the National Book Award. It's from a tiny press. And then some authors move around. There's a book at the bottom, Wendy's Button Box, that Stephen King wrote. It was wonderful. I gave each of these books star reviews in book lists, so you can read those with your book list subscription. But the point is, that's on Cemetery Dance. These are just some examples. If you want to find good books, you have to look beyond the big 5 or even the top 10. And if you want more diverse titles, which I told you you need to look at small presses. This is where the most diverse titles are getting published. They're not getting picked up as often by the big 5 because the authors and the topics are more diverse. Especially, someone mentioned the LGBTQ and sort of the most marginalized voices. Here's another example. Soho is a great small press with big name authors for mysteries. You probably already have a lot of Soho titles. They really try very, very hard to get and promote the mysteries with different perspectives and do an excellent job. The fact that small presses have great titles worth your time is not the emerging trend. This has been happening for a while. What is the emerging trend is that libraries need to include them. There's a lot of constraints when we're dealing with small presses and getting them into libraries. The biggest one is that there aren't quote unquote reviews. Now I try to review as many of these books as possible, and Booklist is doing a good job collecting independent presses, but we can't review everything. And so the first hurdle is we have to get over the fact that we don't have to have an official review in one of only a few sources in order to add those books to our collections. I know this is hard for a lot of people because that's a rule that they have, but what I would say is look to the press that these small publishers are putting out about their books. They're getting blurbs from major authors. So maybe you could justify saying, Gillian Flynn said this book is great and it's a small press and people love Gillian Flynn and that's how I'm going to sell it. Work hard if you do collection development to sell adding these books to the person that's in charge if you don't have a say, and do some due diligence to find these books. And one of your biggest arguments is that they're winning awards. So you could say Her Body and Other Parties. Now that did get reviews, but it got nominated and the reviews came out late. So, you want to make sure you're adding these titles. Also, Another argument people used to make is that the books were poorly produced. This is not the case anymore. It is much cheaper for smaller presses to put out a very solid collection and copy. So please, 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 the physical book is great. Order these books. They circulate. I promise you. Some of these also don't always distribute on your regular like Baker and Taylor Ingram channels, but they do all distribute through Amazon. And I have yet to find a library these days in 2017-18 that hasn't at least ordered one book off of Amazon. So make sure you get them if you can. Again, genre, let me go back to genre resources and awards lists and staying, finding presses you trust will definitely keep you in the know there. But we have Gwendy's button box there. And speaking of that, it is actually a novella. And that is another huge emerging trend. And it really is the result of the ebooks and audiobooks craze. People are getting material stories delivered more quickly to them, especially reading ebooks. We see that a lot of shorter books are being read. Even Exit West, which I had in one of my original slides, is a very short book. It's like barely over 200 pages. I read it on one plane ride. This is a huge trend. They are short, but they are still worth your time. And I want to talk about this, though. Look, novellas aren't a trend, an emerging trend, but adding them to your library collections are. Novellas have been a vibrant, popular form of storytelling for a long time. However, even though these 150th page volumes are really popular with readers, libraries rarely bought them for their collections. The argument always was that we don't have enough money to buy every novella, no matter how good it is, so let's not buy any. Plus, the argument went that those authors who were best at the form normally eventually moved into novels, so we'd be able to add them later. And I did this too. My point is, everyone did this, but we cannot ignore this anymore because things like people like James Patterson are putting out novellas. You're adding those. People like Sean A. McGuire are putting out novellas. We can't ignore that anymore. They are... have you ever heard of Doorway? I don't know a library that doesn't have it. We need to keep adding them. This trend really started back in 2013 when Neil Gaiman released The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which was a novella. But if libraries are debating whether or not they should carry novellas, the fact that you're carrying Patterson is the answer to your question, the book shots. But also, authors who are really well established are now going back and writing novellas. Authors that you're already buying or that you're having their books in their collections, and Sean A. McGuire is a good example because they like the storytelling form. Victor Laval's another great example. We need to make sure we're buying them, we're ordering them, we're respecting them, and we're suggesting them to readers. So again, the novella as a good storytelling is not the trend, but how we do it is. Okay, we have another trend that's emerging, and it's books in translation, and no longer does English equal better. And this trend is a result of a couple other trends that we've talked about. But most notably, an interest in reading more diversely has looked for people to look abroad for titles. It's also meant that publishers have scrambled to find more titles. In that link, you can see an article from the Millions from this year about the Best Translated Book Awards long list. And they talk about the award that was founded in 2008. But let me just give you a quote from there. The award has grown exponentially over the past 10 years. The focus on finding the best books in translation from the past year has been constant, but the pool of eligible titles has expanded from 360 in 2018 to more than 600 for this year's award. And the works being considered are by authors from 87 countries in 54 different languages and published in English by 179 distinct presses. Again, small presses are mattering here. On your screen are two authors that have clearly been influential in this. The first one is the most obvious, Haruki Murakami, who is a must-buy in every library. It also helps that he is a translator of English books into Japanese, so his translations have always been great, even when translation wasn't, because he could check his translator's work. But a couple years ago, we had this huge, My Brilliant Friend, the books in Italian were huge runaway bestsellers, and those are obviously books in translation. Now, the numbers are still small here, but it's definitely emerging. It's emerging enough that you need to be paying attention to these books and ordering them and adding them. But you have to stay informed. And one of the ways I know this trend is emerging enough is that link under Staying Informed goes to Book Riot. And they actually have a regular column called In Translation. And they're posting on it very regularly so you can stay informed. And again, I'm a broken record, but suggest and display in the building and online. Show off that you know this is a trend. Make these books available to readers. They will not find them in the stacks, but they will find them on a display. This leads to another emerging trend, again, that I'm going to talk about. This one is very new to me. Not crowdfunding in general, but crowdfunding for publishers and authors, even very well-known ones. I don't know if you're aware, but there are lots and lots of authors, including ones that make bestseller lists, that have Patreon accounts right now as a way to get extra cash for themselves, because publishing books is not paying the bills that much these days. And they do it by giving fans, their Uber fans, access to content and things. Now, we're obviously not, has nothing to do with the library. We're not going to crowdfund authors, but I think being aware that this is happening, it's providing a much more personalized experience between the reader and the author that you will see in the interaction they have with you. Because if they're having a more intimate experience with the author who's writing the books, they're having a more intimate experience with the books. When they come in, this is your chance to then have a better experience with them, helping them find books. But just know that that's happening. However, there is part of this trend that's trickling down into the publishing world, and that affects us. And that is crowdfunding publishers. I have a link there for Inkshares. We don't have a ton of time, and if you go there, you can read the entire link on how it works. But basically, Inkshares is a publisher that is a bridge between self-publishing and traditional publishing. And what happens is that authors can post their books up there and then crowdfund it. And if they get a certain number of people pre-buying the book, they then publish the book. And I put Kill Creek on there because this is a book that did get published. It got crowdfunded for a couple of reasons. One, I've worked with this book. I got a copy from the author, the publisher. They work with people to get ARCs out. I got a copy. I actually got a finished book. It's a really great well-produced book that will stand up to multiple checkouts. It's been edited. It's been given a cover. They get all those services if they crowdfund. So it's like a real publisher. They then distribute the regular channels once they've hit that critical mass. Kill Creek is just yesterday made the preliminary longlist ballot for Best First Novel for Stoker Award for horror books. Let me tell you something. I'm on that jury for Best First Novel for the Stoker. This book was the highest vote getter in the jury. This book is moving on to a finalist. I would be shocked if it did not. This is a book you can't miss out on. And I didn't even know about Inkshares till I heard about this book from another friend. How we can help. And if you go to that post, I have a librarian from Ohio who talks about how she's found books using Inkshares and how she's an administrator, how she actually became, your library can fund the book with a credit card. And if it goes to publish, you'll get a copy. And if it doesn't, they'll give you your money back. So if there are books you think might work, it would be great. So just find a way to support content that leads to purchase. In that link, again, I go through how you can do it and how you convince your administrators to let you. There's really nothing to lose. Okay, we have one last reader's advisory trend, and then I'm going to show you quickly some service trends that have long links to explain to you what they are so that we can make sure we have time for questions. But my last emerging trends is that fandoms are embraced by all. This is really an offshoot to my genre Readers Fight Back. There is a picture right there of a family dressed up at a con. Families go to cons. If you click on that, there's a whole article about how many more families are attending cons together. Fandoms are something that everybody's doing. People aren't embarrassed anymore. How you can respond is you can host a con at your library. That link goes to the LaGrange Public Library's Anime Fest, which started really small and has grown. And literally, we just invited teens who like anime and then local practitioners. We used a few local stores and the anime club at the school to identify the local comic book shop, to identify people. And we have people who draw anime, who produce it. And it's a wonderful day. You can also attend or even speak at a local con. We have tons here, and you can go. C2E2, the Chicago Comic Con, has a library day that is really inexpensive. Or you can speak at a local con, and that's a report from some librarians in Seattle who spoke at a con, and you can share what the library has for the attendees. You can reach out to local experts and authors. That's a link to United for Libraries. They have authors who are willing to come to libraries, and they are in every genre. And you really never know what could happen. That's a link to the Merrimack County Halloween Festival, which is run by the Haverhill, Massachusetts Public Library and New York Times bestselling author Christopher Golden, who literally just started it as a way to get all his friends together and to promote horror and dark fantasy at the library. It exploded this year in the third annual, and they had Joe Hill, Paul Tremblay, like all these huge authors, Brian Keene, come and spend the day, and had hundreds of people show up. So just know that it's an emerging trend. Are there any quick questions about that before we move into the RA service and collection development trends?
Just one sharing of an example of another genre blending book. I'm putting it into the chat. It's called Feeding the Resistance, Recipes and Ideas for Getting Involved by Julia Farshin. Yeah.
I saw that book the other day. Yeah. Yes. And that's a great example of all the trends coming together. And that's why when you're aware of trends, you will see these things. Cookbooks are just, it's not even a trend. Cookbooks are a standard at libraries. The resistance is a trend. Of course, there will be a way for the two to come together. It happens everywhere. Awesome. Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
Okay. So now I'm going to quickly talk about some RA and collection development service trends. All of these have a longer link that you can go to learn more about the topic. So don't worry about the fact that I'm going to go through them quickly. I did that on purpose so I could get these in here. Okay, first of all, weeding is brutal. Even James Patterson is no longer safe. That link goes to Karen Toonan from Naperville Public Library, who presented Reading Through the Weeds, Weeding Your Way to Better RA Interactions. She is an expert on this topic. But what she says is, we have to weed fiction the same way we weed nonfiction. And James Patterson, for example, you don't need, it's funny because I told her to look into this about a year ago because I was hearing from people, I knew she was working on this topic, all over the country telling me, Becky, I don't have room for all my James Patterson books anymore. I have too many. And so her argument there is, you can easily, check and see what people are reading. But for best-selling authors, a good way to go is keep the first few, keep the current 5, and totally hack out the middle. Be ruthless. Because you can always ILL if someone asks, but you have the beginning for the people who are new and the end for the people who are current. And we rock at resource sharing here in Illinois, so you can always interlibrary loan them. But the fact of the matter is, you have to create a plan and set ground rules. So at Naperville, they have pretty harsh ground rules, but I actually think they're great. They say that only 5% of their collection can be dead at any time. And that's when you use like Baker and Taylor or Collection HQ or something to assess. But you look at your circ and you say, all the books that are, circulating at that lowest level, those only 5% of your collection can be the books that haven't gone out in a while. So at Naperville, they actually make weeding your section to that 5% maximum of quote unquote dead books that haven't gone out in the last. For them, by the way, dead means hasn't gone out in 18 months, but you can set it for whatever. More general would be 3 years. And your annual review is based on that. If your collection is over 5% dead, you get a negative review. So, you got to be, as an administrator, you got to set ground rules. And as a person who's in the trenches, you've got to do it. But don't get emotional about it, okay? As I like to say all the time to librarians everywhere, it's just books. No one is going to die here. But seriously, if it's a book you love, it's a book you bought, if it's a book that you really think is great, this is not a commentary on your professional worth, okay? It's sad to be a book go, but you know what? If you still love it, once it's weeded, take it home. And don't give in to any titles. Be ruthless. Now, that being said, if you really feel strongly about a book and you want to give it a chance to get checked out, first of all, don't check it out yourself. Please don't be that person. Let a patron find it. It's okay that you like it. Let a patron find it. Put those books on the precipice of being weeded on display. Move where they are. Book talk them. Give them a chance to shine. And again, she talks about this at length. Okay, this one I'm barely going to talk about because I have an entire presentation that's on the Rails YouTube page that you can look at. But patron-driven acquisitions is a huge trend. This is the idea that patrons get to choose the books you're ordering. This is collection development that puts the reader first. Use that link. I made sure they were good. It's to a Rails program from a few years ago where people from Chicago Public Library came and talked about it. At the time, I thought, this has nothing to do with me. They have so much money. I'm going to go and see. But you know what? One thing I've learned is patron-driven acquisitions can be done by any library. It's just the scale. In fact, My current library is about to start it, and I know of a very small library in the western suburbs that is going to do it. And in the fall, the Adult Reading Roundtable is going to have a program. Look for it on the Rails website. You don't have to be a member to attend, and it'll be, I know now, it'll be at the Archer Heights branch of Chicago Public Library, which has tons of parking. It is not far from Midway. It's right near the Orange Line. And we are going to have someone from Chicago Public and someone from an itty bitty teeny library talk about patron-driven acquisitions and how any library can do it. But the point is we have to change the way they think. Yes, those of us who do collection development and readers advisory know our collections and know what patrons like. We are professionals who make excellent reasoned and researched choices, but we also don't know everything. As a profession, we need to stop acting like the know-it-alls and start acting more like a concierge. We can learn from the things people are asking that they buy. And by the way, you can set it so that even though somebody does it through your catalog and puts a hold on it, it won't immediately trigger a purchase. And again, we'll talk about this at the program. It'll put it in a folder for you or whoever your ordering person is to consider it. This is a way to find out what people think. Now, if PDA is too much for your organization right now, that's okay. I have a much less controversial way to ask your patrons what they would like. And that is, as I've already mentioned, participatory displays. Or as I like to sell them to bosses, makerspace displays. Again, I have an entire huge post, which I'm not going to read to you, on how every display you do should have an interactive element. The point of this is we need to find ways to ask people what they want. One of my favorite ones, which I describe at length in there and gives technical services people the hives. But before we go on, I want to say it means that books won't be where they're supposed to. But if there's been a day in the entire history of the library where every book is where it's supposed to be, I don't believe it. So let's get over that. But the best way to do participatory display, you could do it right now for January, is what's the favorite thing you checked out of the library this year? And just put up that sign and leave the display blank and let people fill it. In that post, I have a lot of ways to explain how to do it and how to keep a handle on it and how to track what's showing up there. So click through and do it. The point is, and I have lots of other ones, I mentioned it, like, guess the genre, or have people say, what book would you have put on this display, and let them write it down. It's fine. The point of this is patrons should get to be an active participant in their library experience. And if we want to know what they really want, let's make our displays participatory. So I highly suggest you go read that display or that post. It is long, and I have a lot of things in there that will help you. But I want to get to the last few ones before we finish. Okay, and I believe this is almost my last one. We're almost done. So yes, we're almost there. Here's a trend I'm seeing from lots and lots of people, and I'm hearing it all over the country. More people are coming to the library than ever, but I'm hearing that circulations are down, circulation numbers. The previous slide is one way to address this. If you make your displays more participatory, people will check more books out because they'll feel like their voice is being heard, and they'll be more an active participant in the library experience. But the next step is to create a culture of book talking in your library. And I have so many talks about this, and I'm actually doing another one at Reaching Forward for the paraprofessional staff. But I have so many ways I could talk to you about this, and I do have links there. I have a staff on how we got staff and patrons involved in displays, and now everyone is book talking. You can go and see how to do that. That's a presentation there. But I also have links to how to create a culture of book talking in your library, a very long article on how to do it. So the point is, every single person on staff can book talk. And how it works and why it works is just amazing. If you have every staff member talking about what they're reading and watching, whether they work with the public or not, whether it's a book that's part of their department or not, you start doing that, patrons start talking about books. Everyone's sharing books and talking about books. And what happens is more books get checked out because there's a personal experience with it. Again, I have an entire 1-hour presentation on just how to do that, but those links will get you started. And just make sure you know that encouraging staff to book talk, even one of those links shows you the step-by-step guide on how to make it a friendly competition among staff, which I've heard feedback from libraries works really well. Okay, ooh, one of my favorite ones. Please judge a book by its cover. It's fun and it's helpful. That link goes to an entire post where I talk about it. I first talked about this topic in 2008, but look, the publishers pay a lot of money to make a cover that sells the book. and for people as they're passing by. And covers articulate the appeal of a book really well. Who will enjoy it most? You know, if it's got pastel colors, it's probably lighter. If it's got black and red, it's probably violent. They put so much effort into the covers. Why aren't we using these covers to sell the books? Much of it has to do with the bad school librarians and teachers we had at Kids who scolded us for doing this. But since I made my entire career debunking librarian stereotypes, I'm going to tell you now, it's okay. You can easily use the book, the cover of a book, to start the book talking process. And it gives patrons a behind-the-scene peek. Hey, let's look at what the publisher is trying to tell us about that book. It also makes hand-selling titles you've never read easy, because by judging a book by its cover, you're also using that book and the blurbs on it and the stuff that the publishers include to sell it. It's also a great way to stay on top of trends. In that post, I give you examples of how to book talk a book using the cover, but I also have a lot of links of ways you can go to sites that keep track of trends in book covers. So please, please, please spend some time really thinking about using covers to do it. And that's a great way for you to stay on top of trends. And now you've unlocked your trending achievement, which, yay, I'm really proud of you. Good job. Before we get to questions, I just want to give you some final tips. As you saw, I had a lot of links to things so that I can have time to go into them in more detail to give you the maximum number of trends in your hour and a half. But always I am posting using the trending and call to action tags to get the newest and latest materials on my blog and start it as a conversation. As a second level, don't forget that I have a post about assessing past trends to anticipate new ones, where I took trends from a couple of years ago and then I assessed them and saw how they're doing now. And that post is from just a few months ago, but it assesses trends from a couple of years ago. But just keep doing it. Remember back in slide 4 when I showed you how to stay on top of trends? Just do it. My final thing to tell you is you need to pool your knowledge. Maybe, you can only stay on top of trends in one area, and someone else on staff can stay on trends in another. The fact of the matter is you want to just stop worrying about staying up with trends and just do it. You can't be paralyzed with fear. Start worrying about the sheer number of trends or that you aren't hip enough, and just keep doing it. I think that will be very easy for you. You have the skills, and they are librarian skills, and you've attended this training. Not all the now just go out there and start trending. You will see that the patrons respond immediately. When you have what they want, they are more excited about using the library. So they'll check things out, they'll tell their friends that participate, and everybody wins, and you make the library look a whole lot hipper in the process. And it's 11 o'clock, so I'm ready for questions.
All right. Thanks so much, Becky. We just had a couple comments. So one person said that, your suggestion about judging books by their covers, they felt that that's really hard to do with older books.
That is true. You know what you do, though? You go online and you find the newer copy. Because if the book is still out there and being read, they've released a new cover. I showed that with Susan Elizabeth Phillips. The old cover is not good to judge. The new cover with the cleavage is the one that tells you what's in the book. In those cases, yes, with older books, you're going to have to go and use other resources. That's exactly true.
All right. Next one is, the webinar had a lot of great ideas, and the person asked, which one should they do first?
Oh, great question. What I would do first is get yourself up to speed, obviously. I would start really with the resistance. I think that's going to make the most bang for your buck right now, because that's what all your patrons are thinking about. And as we already mentioned, use some of the other trends in there. So get a resistance display up of some kind, and maybe do it with Waiting for Fire and Fury. Here are other books from Resistance Past, or use sort of cross-genre. I also think you should put up a participatory display immediately. I think some of those service areas is where you should start, and then see how some of my trends fit into that. So, for example, the genre blending is such a big deal. So get up a book on, guess the genre, put up tons of different books, genre blending books, and then have a little board, a place where people can post or leave a note that says, what are your favorite genre blended books? Or, What genres are you most interested in? Find a way for people to participate. The other thing I really think you need to do is, when I mentioned pooling your knowledge, start talking to your coworkers about the trends that they are seeing in their different departments, and get a conversation going among the staff and pool the knowledge. So maybe someone who works in, audio visual. Actually, here's a great example. I knew someone in my children's department who was a huge reader of erotica. She could never talk about it at the youth services desk, but she knew all the stuff about erotica because we sort of went out there and found ways for people to tell us what they were. We asked everybody what their favorite things were. We were able to pool her knowledge and use it when the erotica trend came out. So that's what I would do. But start with the resistance stuff, because that's what's on everybody's mind.
All right, awesome. I've got 2 more questions, which will be our last questions, and I know we've run a little over on our time. So for those of you, if you have to leave, please do so. We did record today, so as soon as it's processed and posted, I will let everyone know where the recording is, and you can watch it.
And people could send me questions to the email on the screen. It's no problem.
Yep. Yes. All right. So the last 2 questions. First one is, I'm curious about your thoughts about ways to engage the podcast audience through programming. What do you think about podcast discussions the same way we do book discussions?
I was actually going to say, as soon as I heard the question, podcast discussions are definitely starting to take off. I think that's a wonderful way to engage people. I would say, though, because we tried to start one at LaGrange and people didn't really come, I think you need to start by showing that you know about podcasts, like I talk about, demonstrating you understand the trend, getting up some materials about podcast read and watch alikes, and then have a general maybe program where podcast listeners can come, sort of a social event for podcast listeners, and then launch a podcast discussion group there. But yes, podcast discussion groups are the next trend in book discussions, actually. So you pick a podcast. Really popular ones, obviously, are like the NPR ones. So Radio Lab's a really good one to do, This American Life, and all of those things. So, but find some podcasts, but ask your patrons who use podcasts, listen to podcasts, what their favorite ones are. But yes, that is the next way to engage people. But again, they don't even know that you want to engage them if you're not showcasing in displays. And just because we don't circulate podcasts, because we don't have to, doesn't mean we can't showcase that we know about them. So that's your first step, is to engage them by showing them you know. And then yes, offering podcast discussion groups is a great idea.
Great. All right. One last question. How often, what do you suggest about how often to change displays?
Oh, that's a really great question. So there's a lot of studies out there that say that people come to the library, regular users come once every 3 to 4 weeks, or once every 2 to 3 weeks, because most books have a 3-week due date. But as we know, we have users that come all of the time. I say change up what displays you change based on where they are. So for example, when I worked at the Berwyn Library, we had 2 large displays, and we changed those monthly because we put a lot of work into them. Maybe not into making them look great, but into the topics, and we had someone who organized them. But to give the illusion that we were changing them more frequently, we changed one at the beginning of the month and one at the middle of the month. So it appeared that they changed every 2 weeks, even though we kept them up for a month. And those involved planning, and we got all library help on those, and people helped with pulling books in with the ideas. Then we had another display more right near our desk, which was more visual. We would put up a picture. We just put books out with it. And that we changed very frequently. Book displays that you just put out sort of groups of books anywhere can be changed as often as you like. And I suggest doing that frequently. In the stacks, putting up little displays is a great idea that people encounter as they're roaming the stacks. And then changing those frequently, it encourages people to go back into the stacks if they start to notice that the books are changing. So maybe you're in the mystery section and you just pull out 4 or 5 books. You need to weed to do this, but on an empty shelf or an area where there's not a lot, and you put just a few books face out, and maybe the display is just that they're good reads that you want people to see. They don't have a sign or anything. But if you change those frequently, people expect them to change. And then we have other displays that we keep up because we have a program coming up and we want to showcase that. So I would say if you can every 2 weeks change something in the library, And again, have frequent small displays that maybe you just do spur of the moment. I often, I have a library, Huntsville, Alabama, where at their circulation desk, they started having the circ staff every couple days put up books, currently reading, currently talking about, or just whatever. Just pick a book. The people working at the desk, while they were working, were allowed to put up 3 or 4 books for every shift or every couple shifts. And when they were gone, the next person could put up whatever they wanted. It really got the participatory experience of the staff excited, and it made something that the patrons could talk about. You don't even have to tag who put the books up. But I would say at every service desk, books should be out, or whatever you circulate at that desk, movies that are just there and standing up there on the desk until they go. And those can change every day.
All right, great. Well, we went a little over on time. Thanks for everyone who stuck around and hung with us. Becky, thank you so much for your time today. It's always great to hear your ideas and your expertise about books. I always get new ideas from you. And we had one comment that one of our participants is really excited about using these ideas and sharing them with her colleagues and patrons. So thank you.
Yay! Good, I'm glad. All right, well, feel free to contact me and to look at the slides on your own time. Thanks, everyone.
All right, everybody, thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.